Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar of the year, the Charter of Investors for Impact, What Do We Stand For? It's a pleasure for me to see so many people connected to these sessions today. So my name is Alessia Gianoncelli, and I'm the head of the Knowledge Center at EVPA, where I'm responsible for all activities linked to research and content development. I'm speaking to you today from our office in Brussels with my colleague Gianluca Gaggiotti, EVPA Research Associate, who is responsible for our upcoming data collection and who will be moderating this webinar together with me. So before we dive into the topic of today's webinar, I would like to address a few housekeeping rules. So throughout this session, you will be able to open or hide the control panel, which is the console that appears on the right-hand side of your screen. At the end of the webinar, we will have 15 minutes for Q&A, during which our panelists will answer your inquiries. So if you do have a question, don't hesitate to write it down in the relative section of the control panel at any moment during the webinar. And please don't forget to clearly mention to whom you would like to address your questions, so then we can moderate this part. So since the number of participants is high, we're keeping everyone muted. And again, you can use the question section to write us. Last but not least, note that this session is being recorded and you should be able to watch the recording and consult this presentation as of next week on EVPA's website. If you encounter any technical issues, please don't hesitate to contact my colleague Caroline, and you can find a number to reach her here on the slide or also on our website. Of course, you can also use the question section to let us know about any technical problem while connected to the webinar. So again, we will look into this section, so please feel free to contact us through this option. So it is now the moment to present to you the three experienced practitioners and long-lasting EVPA members who will be sharing today with us the way in which they apply the principles of the Charter, being investors for impact. So I'm glad to introduce Holly Piper, head of CAF Venturesome, which is the social investment arm of the Charities Aid Foundation. CAF Venturesome is one of the most established and active players in the UK social investment market. And since joining CAF in 2012, Holly has led significant fundraising as well as managing a portfolio of innovative social investments. So welcome, Holly. Then welcome to Peter Oslander, who is the founder of Sherpa and who was appointed fund manager when SA2 Fund and Sherpa merged in 2015. SA2 is a Belgian impact fund, particularly keen to support early stage or growth phase businesses with scalable and innovative solutions and an integrated impact business model. Peter has been active in the social investment sector since 2004, and he also served as chair of the board of EVPA in the past. Last but not least, welcome to Karen Hitchke, Managing Director and Co-Chief Investment Officer at Yunus Social Business, which runs a philanthropic venture fund aimed at growing local social businesses that provide employment, education, healthcare, clean water, and clean energy to over 5 million people in developing countries. At Yunus Social Business, Karen is responsible for overseeing the worldwide investment and portfolio management activity, as well as building and training the investment team. So thank you for joining us today and for sharing your knowledge and insights with us. So in terms of the structure of the webinar of today, first I'm going to give you a brief introduction about the Charter of Investors for Impact, and then our experts will tell us why they think the Charter is an important milestone for the impact ecosystem. And after that, my colleague Gianluca will present the new interactive charter that we are officially launching today, and he will show you how to navigate it. Throughout this navigation, our speakers will illustrate how these principles apply in practice to their work as investors for impact. In the end, as already mentioned, we will have a Q&A moment during which we are going to ask questions to our speakers. And please note that in case your question will not be answered during this Q&A moment, we will try to follow up with you individually. So let's now dive into the topic of today, the Charter of Investors for Impact. In a context in which the impact ecosystem is constantly in evolution and there are many actors that are entering the space to generate social impact, we felt the need to put some clarity around definitions and ways of investing. So after our research on impact strategies back in 2018, while we had identified two main strategies, investing for and investing with impact, last year we have launched what we call the Charter of Investors for Impact. So this charter is the result of a collective effort of experienced practitioners from the impact community. This charter should be interpreted as guiding principles for all those on a journey of investing for impact. And we acknowledge that other actors related to some or of these principles, but we believe that the collective set reflects the DNA of Investors for Impact. And lastly, we see this charter as an invitation to others to collaborate and to shape the larger impact ecosystem. So, this is the charter, and I'm now going to quickly guide you through the 10 principles. And then, as I told you earlier, my colleague Gianluca and our practitioners will go in depth into each of them. So let's start from the first one. So Investors for Impact are problem-focused and solutions-oriented, innovating the way to tackle societal challenges. Then we have Investors for Impact, put the final beneficiaries at the center of the solutions. Investors for Impact are highly engaged for the long term, striving for lasting impact. Investors for Impact take risks that most others are not prepared to take. Investors for Impact measure and manage social impact. They provide also extensive non-financial support. They tailor their financial support to the needs and the characteristics of social purpose organizations. Investors for Impact proactively announce collaboration with others. Investors for Impact work to foster the mobilization of resources in the social impact ecosystem. And last but not least, Investors for Impact uphold the high ethical standards. So we really believe that all these 10 principles describe and define the essence of Investors for Impact. So as of today, just to give you information, more than 260 practitioners signed the charter. And of course, if you would like to endorse the principles as well, don't hesitate to do the same. We will share with you the link afterwards. So now, after this brief introduction to the charter, I would love to ask our speakers why they think, and if they think, the charter is such an important document for the community of Investors for Impact and beyond. So I'm giving now the floor to Olli, and then Peter will answer the same question, and finally Karen can give us her insight as well on the importance of this document. So please, Olli.
Okay. Thanks very much, Alessia, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be joining you this afternoon. So I think the charter, to me, is really important because it's an opportunity to celebrate and encourage other investors to invest for high impact, but also to really positively explain the differences between the types of investment that we're making, that we're going to talk about today, and other investments that might be with impact, but still perhaps seeking a more commercial return, and explaining in a really positive way why actually taking quite high risks, accepting a lower return for really high social impact can be really beneficial, and promoting that as a positive difference.
Thank you so much, Olli. And then Peter, if you would like to take the floor.
Yes, thank you, Alessia, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, why the charter is so important, in my view, is that impact investing is a growing market. When I got into the sector in 2004, the term wasn't invented yet. At that time, it was simply about applying investor logic to social causes. And since the market has been growing gradually, and I think the last couple of years accelerated a lot, and my feeling is in the coming years that will even further accelerate. Many new people and organizations are joining in and taking impact investing on board, asset managers, foundations, etc. It's a good thing because it will grow the funding that is available for good causes. But it will. There's also a risk of investor logic growing more dominant and getting unbalanced to the rest. So I think it was a very good initiative of EVPA to launch this charter and steer the development. It will help. It will help practitioners to keep a focus as much as possible on how to best deploy the funding and resources for the support of social causes and for social change. The charter makes clear to everyone in the sector, not only practitioners, but also LPs, investors, or spectators, what the key elements of impact-focused investing are. And it can be seen as a guidance for everyone caring about the quality of social outcomes.
Thank you so much, Peter. And of course, all your points are very exciting, and we are happy that you are able to share with us your views. Then I'll give the floor to Karen. So please, Karen, go ahead.
Sure. Great. And thanks a lot for giving us the opportunity also here to express this. I think why the charter is so important is that it is, basically also as Holly and Peter says, it sets very clear expectations, guidelines for the philosophy and focus of impact investors. And also, I used to work in venture capital myself, and as Peter said, I mean, the space is really widening. There are all kind of, let's say, investors which say they're impact investors, but obviously there's a wide range of impact first, finance first, both of it, trade-offs. And having been a venture capital myself, I also know what the obligation is as a venture capitalist, like a finance first person, in order to, how to invest and how to also grow and promote a business. So I think it is really important to set here a clear framework, to have an understanding between the LPs, the investors, but also the investees, the social business or social enterprises we are supporting, to say what is really the focus. So in terms of alignment, I think it's a really important document. I think also what it does, it really promotes a sense of collaboration, a level of professionalism and transparency. Also, for example, the focus of measuring, really being transparent about the impact, and the collaborative side, creating ecosystems, working with partners rather than running into a competitive situation. And I think if we want to use impact investing really also as a tool to tackle the sustainable development goals, I think that is really a very important message that we can also spearhead. And then maybe also, that will transpire more and more to also more traditional businesses, which will then take on certain of these principles over time. So that's why I think it's really fantastic philosophy, and funnily enough, it also coincides with a lot of the principles that we had already set for ourselves, that Professor Yunus, who's our inspiration, basically had set. So I think it's really a logical development of that space.
This is great. So thank you, Karen. And again, I would like to remind the audience that you can send us your questions using the questions section. We are already receiving some. So again, once more, thank you to our speakers. And now I would like to give the floor to Gianluca so we can officially launch our interactive charter.
So thank you, Alessia, for introducing the charter, and thanks for the inspiring insights of the speakers. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gianluca Gaggiotti, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm the EVPA Research Associate. And I'm very happy to drive you through our new interactive charter and focus now into the first 4 principles. So I will start from the homepage of EVPA. So I hope you're going to see it on your screen. And here you can go on the research section and go on publications. So the first link on the top is the new Charter of Investors for Impact webpage, where you can find the different materials that has been developed around the charter. So for the first is the new interactive tool, and before diving in, I wanted to tell you that this tool is aimed at facilitating the navigation of the different principles, and that there you can also find sub-sentences that are aimed at explaining more in depth the principle, and also quotes from 10 thought leaders of the impact ecosystem that were aimed at capturing the essence of each principle. So I would go in depth into all the quotes, and I will leave it up to you to discover. So I will show you that it's very easy to navigate. As you can see here, I would suggest you to expand to full screen mode so that you can see it clearly. And you can navigate it also using this bottom tool at the bottom. You can navigate it easily, but you can also interact, let's say, directly on the screen. So clicking on read more, we go on the first page. That is the introductory page. You can see all the principles. By clicking on them, you can go directly to them. But you can also learn more about the charter, expanding this section, or start from the first principle. That is what I will do. So let's dive into the first principle. So investors for impact are problem-focused and solutions-oriented, innovating the way to tackle societal challenges. So through this principle, we really wanted to stress the peculiarity of investors for impact in tackling societal challenges and starting from existing solution and trying to innovate the way they tackle the challenge, focus on additionality and on solutions that are bringing new ways of tackling these challenges. So for the tool, as I was mentioning, you can expand this session and access the 3 sentences that are aimed at explaining a bit the principle. And here you can also find the quote that for this principle has been made by Uli Grabenwarter, who's the Deputy Director of Equity Investments at the European Investment Fund. So you can navigate it also from the bottom side, and we will move to principle 2. That is, investors for impact put the final beneficiaries at the center of the solutions. So here we really wanted to highlight the importance of this important category of stakeholders, that are final beneficiaries, that we really believe they should embed it from investors for impact in their impact value creation chain. Here you can find a quote from Lisa Heyenberg, who's assistant professor at ESADE Business School. Moving to principle 3, that is, investors for impact are highly engaged for the long term, striving for lasting impact. Again, this one is capturing the importance of having a long-term view, a long-term horizon, while supporting social purpose organizations. And this principle is also linked with the concept of patient capital, that is a type of capital that our investors are usually providing. And here you can find a quote from Tanya Holm Ranalit, who's Executive Director at iCare Ltd. And last but not least, in this first part, we will focus on principle 4, that is, investors for impact take risks that most others are not prepared to take. And here we wanted to stress how investors for impact are willing to really take the risk of supporting innovative and disruptive solutions that could really improve the way we are tackling societal challenges. And we also wanted to put a focus on the fact that investors for impact also assess the impact risk. So the risk of not achieving the expected social impact. And here you can find a quote from Chris West, who's a co-founder and managing partner of and director, of Sumerian Foundation and Sumerian Partners. So it's time for me now to stop and go back to the PPT presentation, because I would like to leave the floor to Holly Piper, who's gonna tell us how CAP Ventures is applying this principle in practice. So Holly, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Gianluca. So if I start with kind of principle 1, as Gianluca has just said, so being problem-focused, solutions-orientated and innovating the way to tackle societal challenges. I think there are a couple of things that I really wanted to pick up on in this principle. One is that impact really is at the heart of what we do, a kind of CAF Venturesome. So when we are looking at considering a new social investment, we start with what social impact will this investment support or expand. So we're looking to use our money where it will really support social organisations to, might be sustain their impact, it might be to grow their impact. But if they're not having additional impact with their money, or if they're not securing their impact, then it doesn't feel like a good use kind of our capital, to be honest, and it isn't something we'd prioritise doing. So we definitely start with kind of the social impact being at the heart of what we do. But the other thing that I feel is increasingly important is the ability and desire of investors for impact to support innovation and to have an appetite supporting that innovation. So we know that social organisations, when they are testing new ways of working, particularly working with particularly vulnerable groups of people, that they may need a lot of headroom, a lot of risk capital to try and find a solution or a service that really works. And whereas in the kind of commercial world, those, you can provide upfront capital and eventually that might be repaid because of the commercial success of the venture. With social organisations, that can be a little bit more tricky. And I think that's really where Investors for Impact have a really important role, being able to take that risk to support innovation. And if I may, Gianluca, can I move to principle 2, and then I'm going to talk about the same example to try and illustrate both points, if that's okay. So principle 2 is putting the final beneficiaries at the centre of the solutions. As a quick aside, I have to say I agree with Lisa's brilliant quote, which you all saw just now when Gianluca was taking us through the interactive tool, about not liking the term beneficiaries and feeling it's too passive. And I agree really strongly with that. But unfortunately, common usage means that I would still refer to beneficiaries, but I will try and think of different language to use instead. Anyway, I think kind of the point of this principle is really, it kind of goes back to that impact. So we're doing it for people and communities we're seeking to have impact for. We're not really doing this for our investors. We're thinking about the beneficiaries first. And I guess a good example of this is there's a coffee making social enterprise based here in London called Change Please. If you've spent any time in London or going through London Bridge or some of the other large train stations, you may well have seen one of their very fabulous bright yellow coffee carts. And if you haven't, next time you're in London, please do make sure you find them and go and buy a coffee, because the person selling you that coffee or that coffee cart will be someone who has until very recently been homeless. And what Change Please do is they take people who are long-term homeless, so have a variety of quite complex needs, and they train them up as baristas, so as coffee makers, and they work with them until they're kind of fully trained up and move on to employment in one of the many other coffee shops that there are kind of at the moment. But they really focus on ensuring that those individuals are supported into really full-time employment. And they use kind of the proceeds from their coffee making to do this. And so as a social enterprise model, we really like it, because the more coffee they sell, the more people they can support. But we also really like the way they are absolutely focused that almost every single staff member they employ, so not just the baristas they're training up, but everyone else, are people who have until very recently been homeless. And they are really, really focused on how they can deepen their impact on those individuals in their communities. And they've been, for me, that's a really fantastic example of a social enterprise really kind of going the extra mile to have that impact. But when we first supported them several years ago, that this success wasn't kind of immediately evident that they were going to be this successful. So we were able to kind of make initially quite a risky £50,000 loan, followed by other loans, to kind of support their to buy initially 10 more coffee carts, and then kind of further expansion as well. Whereas now they look like a much more solid commercial investment. Several years ago they didn't, but because we were prioritising the impact, that's why we were able to support them. And partly thanks to our support, but mainly thanks to their very hard work, they've been able to grow kind of really successfully. So that's kind of the example I wanted to show to illustrate Principle 1 and Principle 2. Gianluca, if I can move on to the next slide, please. So Principle 3, and I'm going to double up as well and talk about Principle 3 and Principle 4 at the same time. Thank you. So it's all very well being kind of impact focused, but some other really important parts to me are being really engaged for the long term and thinking about the lasting impact, not just the short term impact. So we recognise that complex social challenges often require longer time horizons. So we've been supporting some social organisations in our portfolio for well over a decade. We also think we're not doing a good enough job, if I'm honest about this. We're currently exploring increasing our loan terms, so better able to support organisations which need longer term finance. So the vast majority of our loans at the moment are 3 to 5 years. And so the organisations that we've been supporting for over a decade have had multiple loans. We don't think that's the most effective way we can have of always supporting organisations. So it's something we are very actively exploring in terms of how we can do that better, because that long-term gap is really important. And that's both long-term finance to support kind of the long-term impact. So for me, they're related. But we also know that if I move on to principle 4, if that's okay, the long-term horizons is one thing. The other thing is going back to the risks. So principle 4 of this new charter is taking risks that most others are not prepared to take. And that for me is a really, really, really important differentiator between an investor for impact and an investor with impact. Now, at CAF Venturesome, we're funded by philanthropic capital, so charitable capital, and that enables us really to invest for impact. So we take a high, sometimes an extremely high financial risk for a high or very, potentially very high social impact. And it's worth being very clear that we expect to write off a small amount of capital. So we expect our funders to lose some money in the social investments that we make. And I realise that might be highly controversial to some people and not at all controversial to others, but it is something we're extremely clear about. And we think that that's important, because we think that without that ability to take very, very high risks, a lot of the organisations that we're currently supporting, we wouldn't be able to support them in the same way. So effectively, we're asking our funders to kind of bear the risks of that support. It's also worth saying that we work very closely in partnership with other funders who may provide investment perhaps at a later stage or other types of investments, so that we can use our money as carefully as possible, where possible, kind of working in partnership to leverage kind of other finance. Now that can all sound kind of quite academic, so if I may, I just wanted to illustrate it with a short example on community-led housing. Thank you. It's a beautiful picture showing a very, very sunny skies. I'll be honest, it is not usually that sunny in Cornwall at this time of year, but taken on a sunny day, this is an example of one of the new houses built by a community-led housing scheme we were lucky enough to support down in Cornwall. Now, the reason I wanted to kind of show this as an example is actually less this social investment in particular. So we worked with an organisation called Cornwall CLT to provide kind of junior finance that they needed to build 8 affordable new homes in a village in Cornwall. It's actually much more about the broader approach we've taken to supporting community-led housing in the UK. So we have been running a specialist social investment fund to support community-led housing since 2009. We have imminently launching our 3rd specialist fund in this sector, and the reason we're doing that is because we recognise that community-led housing is a way of solving some of the housing problems that there are in the UK. I'm also really aware that the community-led housing model is quite growing in popularity in Belgium and France, as well as elsewhere in Europe. And the community-led housing in this country, so in the UK, it's a model that kind of doesn't quite work commercially at the moment, so it requires investors for impact to take high risk. It requires investors to work very long term for long term impact, and it requires investors to work really collaboratively with others. And that's why I kind of wanted to mention this particular specialist fund as a way where I think we're hopefully living principles 3 and 4 and kind of taking that risk for that long term impact. Gianluca, I think I'll leave it there if that's okay, and I look forward to receiving questions at the end of the presentation. work really helps.
Thank you very much, Ollie, for going in depth into these principles. And I think it's extremely interesting for us as researchers, but I think for a wider audience, it's very interesting to see how these principles apply in practice and which are the main insights that an experienced practitioners like you can share around this principle. And you also stress the importance of them. So thank you very much for your contribution. And now it's time to move to the next principles that are principle 5, 6, and 7, and they are, let's say, strongly linked with what we call the three venture philanthropy core practices that are impact measurement and management, non-financial support, and tailor financing. So going back to the interactive tool, so that I can also show the audience who are the practitioners and the thought leaders that contributed with a quote. So here again, we can see how it's easily retrievable principle 5, which is investors for impact measure and manage social impact. So we really believe that this is a very important principle, and as it has been reported, so while we launched this charter with a session at our annual conference in The Hague in November 2019, we ran a live poll with the audience, and the 50% that attended reported, not that surprisingly, that this is the principle investors for impact should improve the most. And we really believe that there's a huge space for improvement for this principle, and we really believe a lot of work is still to be done in the space. So here you can find a quote from Peter Oslander, who's also going to elaborate a bit more on this principle afterwards. And now I will move to principle 6, that is investors for impact provide extensive non-financial support. This is the second practice of venture philanthropy, and it really stresses the importance of going beyond merely financing social purpose organizations, but providing them with a wide range of non-financial support services that can really help them grow their business model in case they have one, and their social impact. And here we can find a quote from Wouter, sorry for my pronunciation if you are online, van der Siepen, who's executive director at Campani. Moving to principle 7 and stopping for this second part, there is principle 7, that is investors for impact tailor their financial support to the needs and characteristics of social purpose organizations. We also believe this principle is crucial because it's linked to the third practice of venture philanthropy, that is tailor financing, and it's the process through which investors for impact really find the most appropriate financial instrument to support the social purpose organization at the different stages of development, but also linked to the different natures of the business model they're aimed at supporting. So here you can find a quote from Arve Ko, who's managing director at FSG. So before going back to the PPT, I would also like to tell you that EVPA, in case you don't know, EVPA has published 3 guides for these 3 practices that you can find and freely download on our website. And these guides also include practical toolkits that you can, and frameworks that you can use in case you're an investors for impact to practice, let's say, and adopt the venture philanthropy approach. So now I'll move back to the PPT, and it's the time for me to leave the floor to Peter Oslander, who's gonna elaborate a bit on these 3 principles and providing his insights. So Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gianluca. Yeah, the 3 principles. First, 2 lines on SI2. As Alessia mentioned, SI2 is a for impact investment fund. It's and it has a model like a venture capital funds. So we're basically applying this structure, venture capital structure, but focused on achieving the highest impact possible through our ventures, and in the end return the money to our investors. The investors are families and foundations that are funding the fund and are indeed targeting to support early stage social businesses and to help them scale to maximize the impact. That's maybe that will be relevant to know when we come to principle 7, and I'll explain there what we do. But we'll start with principle 5, which I think gets to the core of what impact investing is about. It's about creating social value, and in order to know what you're doing or what you are achieving, the social purpose organizations, the ventures, need to know where they are going and how they are supposed to get there. And in that framework, impact measurement and management is indispensable. It starts with really understanding, and it helps you understand what the stakeholder needs are, and that is key in developing your product or your service as a social business. To us, impact measurement is similar to business intelligence. It will help you get a better understanding on stakeholder needs and to tailor your services in order, in the end, to get more impact and at the same time get better business. So it's working two ways. We follow SROI principles as they have been as they are nurtured and developed by Social Value International, and we guide our portfolio companies in the use of those. To us, the impact measurement is a bottom-up process. We do not impose key performance indicators that need to be reported by the ventures that we are invested in. We find out together with them, or they do it on their own if they are advanced enough to do so. They on their own decide what KPIs are actually indicating what the level of impact they make. So it's a bottom-up approach, and it should serve the SPO, the social business needs. As an example, I would like to mention Justice for Two. It's a company that is in the field of access to justice. So it offers at the moment one product, and they are working on another one, or service actually, I should say, to allow people to have low threshold access to solutions for their legal problems. The first topic is divorces. Unfortunately, there are quite a lot of divorces every year in the Netherlands, which are causing a lot of damage to the divorcing couple, to their children, and to the immediate environment. And they and because most, or if you're not careful, those end up in a fight. And Justice for Two offers a collaborative way of reaching a divorce, which is in general a much better outcome than the average divorce process currently does. In their impact measurement, where Justice for Two has done in full, guided by SI2, we started helping them doing a stakeholder analysis and segmenting the segmentation. So the analysis led to a segmentation of different kinds of groups of stakeholders they have, which was a basis for tailoring their marketing approach, but also for tailoring their service towards each of those different stakeholder groups. We help them design questionnaires to track the actual results of their service by doing intake and exit questionnaires, and also 6 months after the divorce questionnaires. We help them aggregate the data to get to information, and we help them create a full report on their impact. And that full report helped them in the end convincing the government to support Justice for Two. The government actually subsidizes people that are unable to pay for a divorce, and that in that subsidy scheme, Justice for Two has gotten an advantage over other channels that are subsidized because of their effectiveness and their high impact. I think I'd like to move to Principle 6, providing non-financial support, even extensive non-financial support, and to explain what we are doing there. Again, the non-financial support is also tailored to the needs of the venture, of the SPO, and we will give non-financial support where it is needed, and we are in a position to provide it. Basically, we take a board member role, a non-executive director role in the ventures where we are invested, either an NED in a board or a board seat in a supervisory body. And usually that board member role is done by our investment manager, and he or she is the first point of contact and also the first to help with the non-financial support where needed and where he or she is able to provide. Of course, that investment manager will call on the rest of the team. We are a team with 7 people, each having different competencies and able to support in different fields. And apart from that, we regularly call on our investment committee members who can bring their particular expertise, or even board members of the fund. Again, it's based on the needs of the SPO, because it needs to go bottom up. But a few examples we've done last year. We've done a training for the CEOs in our portfolio, and actually we teamed up with another impact fund there to include both of the portfolio company CEOs in a leadership training. This year we are going to have a one-day event on organizational development, where all the portfolio companies will be participating. We've helped 2 of the companies that have done strategic repositioning or strategic plan development. We've helped them with that. And for 3 or 4 even of our companies, we helped them design a financial and operational control dashboard to get them more to grips on their finances and their operations. And we help in business development where it works by making connections with, for instance, one of the companies is producing or outsourcing the production of their products, and we link them to a production partner that can also be a distributor of their products, because it happened to be a match. The only area where it will not be immediately dependent of the needs from the social business is the impact measurement and management area. We support all of the companies in doing that, as I just explained with the previous principle. Principle 7. Tailored financial support. that is very important too. Again, this topic needs to be approached bottom up. What is exactly the funding need of the SPO? When you get in touch or when they first approach you with their requests, sometimes their actual request doesn't really match the need of the organization. The stage where we invest often requires risk-bearing capital, and there are sometimes SPOs that ask for a loan rather than for a funder that joins in with the risk. We think that's not fair, so we try to design the funding method to the need that there is. In doing that, we have to take into account what our own limitations are. As mentioned earlier, we are a venture capital fund, so we have that logic. Venture capital usually provides risk-bearing funding, and that's why our funding is usually equity. It can be a loan or a mix, but only if that loan or that mix of equity loan has a result-related component. So we know that in what we do, we can lose all of the funding, and that the flip side of that is that we cannot accept a cap on the return. So we need, except for an unlimited loss, we should also be able to have an unrestricted upside if that is the case. And that is the reason why sometimes we have to say to SPOs that we are not able to provide the appropriate funding because their legal structure or their demand and the actual need is for a capped instrument, and in those cases we will not invest because then there is a mismatch. That's the way how we apply the tailored financial support with our portfolio. So yeah, to close this off, I wanted to say that whatever it is, if it is impact measurement and management, if it's non-financial support or tailored financing, always approach bottom up.
Thank you very much, Peter, for sharing these insights and for reminding all of us that bottom-up approach is very important in this space, and especially adopting the three core practices. And I would also like here to stress the importance of the practices and also the fact that we developed some trainings related to impact measurement management and to tailor financing. So if you want to learn more on our website, you can go on the Training Academy offer and discover more about it. So now it is time to move to the last three principles. So before moving on, I would also like to stress the fact that these principles are not in order of importance. So all the principles are equally important, and we really believe that also these three last principles are very important for investors for impact. So just going to full screen mode again and starting now from principle 8, there is investors for impact proactively enhance collaborations with others. And this is for us important to stress how there are a lot of synergies, we believe, among different actors in the ecosystem, and by collaborating, those synergies can be exploited. And in this case, there is a quote from Cliff Pryor, who is the CEO of Big Society Capital. Moving on, principle 9, that is investors for impact work to foster the mobilization of resources in the social impact ecosystem. And here we would like to highlight how it is important to go beyond our own ecosystem and find ways to attract further capital to develop new and effective solutions at scales. And here you can find a very interesting quote from Edda Palsson-Moller, who's co-founder and CEO of Time.org. And last but not least, Investors for Impact uphold high ethical standards. So this is principle number 10, and we believe this principle is crucial because the credibility of the whole ecosystem, of the whole sector, depends on these principles. So we really believe Investors for Impact should uphold on these high ethical standards. And here you can find a very interesting quote from Deirdre Mortel, who's the CEO of Social Innovation Fund Ireland. So before moving back to the PPT, I wanted to show you that by looking at this final page, you can click on the bottom, sign now, and all of you can individually sign the charter on our webpage. So moving back to the PPT, and it's time now for me to leave the floor to our third speaker. So Karen, please elaborate on how on the activities and showcase some of the activities of Unir Social Business related to these three principles. So Karen, the floor is yours.
Perfect, thank you, Gianluca. So maybe also just quickly before going into principles, a few words about YSB. We are basically as we said, a philanthropic loan provider. So we provide funding in the form of loans in various countries, mostly emerging and middle income countries. Those are India, we are in East Africa, Uganda, and Kenya, and then Latin America, Colombia and Brazil. And the companies that we do fund, the social businesses, are typically just before break even or at break even. They have a proven business model, but they are really still at a very, let's say, entrepreneurial centric stage, moving in this transition from, moving away from an entrepreneur into a proper organization that can then also scale. The investment size that we do, the funding size is about $100,000 to $300,000 US. So rather early stage prior to other impact investors coming in. We support these companies along this transition to make them really and turn them into really scalable organizations. So maybe moving on then to the eighth principle, not the first, but the first for me. How do we work to proactively enhance collaboration with others? There are really a lot of, let's say, a lot of angles here. One is, of course, we do work with other investors in this ecosystem. As I said, we come in at a rather early stage. It's really important for these social businesses then to have follow-on funding to provide the funding that is necessary for further growth. And we do work very, very actively with co-investors, either work co-investing together or making sure that once we have basically exhausted our funding, we can really bring other co-investors in. We did that, for example, for a motorbike leasing company in East Africa called Tugende, who once we had provided them with working capital of another of 300,000, we basically triggered conversations with other investors, and by now they have raised another 6 or 7 million in funding that allows them to grow. That is really one important element. We do share a lot of learnings. I think that is also really enhancing the collaboration. We do record publications. We had a big lessons learned report with USA that we have also published, and we presented it at AMDI and SunCalp in SunCalp conference last year in India. We developed together with Boston Consulting Group a capacity building framework that we also apply internally. We did share that with EVPA, in fact, so it's in one of the reports. And we are also doing sessions on that. So we held a webinar on that tool. We, in fact, just this week, presented it in front of 150 Belgian impact investors just yesterday, which basically reached out to us once they had seen that in the EVPA report. And I think this kind of learning is also very, very important because it's a nascent sector. And it's really important that we basically all pull together to say how can we really improve the way we support these social businesses. And then also finally, how do we support other organizations working with entrepreneurs just a few examples. In Uganda, we have been in the jury with Unreasonable, an accelerator program that you're probably very aware of, so that we can support their entrepreneurs that are in the program from a little bit more from an investment perspective. We are having joint events with GIZ and with Bit Network. We basically get proposals from organizations like Bit Network, like Unreasonable, to move their candidates or their accelerators into our investment readiness program that we are also providing. So I think that is really important, that we say there are different players in that ecosystem, and no one person can cover it all. And it's really important to complement each other's skills here. Moving on to the next principle, principle 9. How do we work to mobilize additional resources for the social impact ecosystem? And I've outlined here a few. I mean, we're having a lot of activities, but one I really want to focus on here is basically triggering other resources in the form of impact funds going into the sector. So in addition to doing our own work, we are working with corporates, but also foundations, in order to facilitate them to develop their own investment strategy in impact investing based on our experience, and see if they can set up their own fund, or if they can use some of the assets in sector fund social enterprises and move into impact investing. So for example, there's a Spanish foundation called the Open Value Foundation. We had worked already on a philanthropic basis with, they had been supporting us. We helped them then, on top of that, to define an investment thesis for their own capital. And now they set up an impact investing fund that is investing in East Africa. We work very closely with them together also to source investment possibilities, and they can then basically help these companies to scale further. That is just one example how we are crowding in others, the other funds into the sector, which I think is really important, mobilizing that. We're also educating philanthropists. So we're having really workshops with philanthropists to say, how can you use your funding in a way to catalyze the impact investing ecosystem by providing grants for capacity building, by possibly funding yourself directly through impact investing, but also supporting the underlying ecosystem. So I think that is really important, to take a very holistic approach and to crowd more funding into that sector. And also adding to that, we have recently piloted an outcome payment tool, basically a blended finance tool that can also be used, called the social success node, which can also be used to bring additional funding into the sector, basically allowing the more mature companies to social businesses to get additional funding, for example, in forms of loans into their organizations, but being very, very clearly aligned with the investors to create the outcome, the social outcome that they really want to create. And that again calls, let's say, semi-commercial capital into the sector without distorting that clear focus on the social mission or that social vision that the company really has. Moving on to the last principle, upholding high ethical standards. That should be self-understood. I think it's nice that this closes it off, because I think it transcends through all the other principles. Ethical standards have obviously a lot of elements, but a few specific aspects here. One is there has to be an integrity, a fairness, and a responsibility for all the stakeholders we are dealing with. In fact, these are reflected in the 7 principles that Professor Yunus at some stage set out on how to do social business. So very, very clear focus on the social objectives to overcome poverty or other basically problems. The focus on the financial economic sustainability, clear dealing with investors, very clear expectation management, funding comes back, but any returns will be reinvested then into the social purpose, into the company itself. And at the same time, being very aware that these social enterprises really need to provide fair wages, be gender sensitive, environmentally conscious, and have really proper working conditions. Something that obviously in our developed economies is pretty well regulated, but in the countries where we're acting in, not necessarily. I think that is one important part on how we deal with our stakeholders. Another one is the transparency, and that has already, I mean, the whole question about, you know, measuring impact, but also the transparency with our donors, because we are philanthropic, or to your investors, to have clear financial but also impact reporting to investors, so they see that they are really putting their money into an impact first mission. We do have internal reviews, but also regular workshops where we look at our challenges and the lessons learned. And we do share those with our donors as well. As I said, we run workshops with our donors to say, you know, what have also been failures. And I think it's really, really important to learn from that, and also to be transparent in order to set fair expectation and not to overpromise, which I do believe is a bit of a challenge in the sector. And then with the companies themselves, with the social business we invest in, we have a, let's say, very basic monthly reporting, but it also is basic transparency of those businesses to us. And it does allow also a constructive dialogue when we interact with the businesses, to be able to tackle their challenges and also be able to support them in the right way, because we know what their issues are. We can talk about it openly, and then we can also see how we can gather the best support network that they need. And finally, I think also a matter of high ethical standard is really the evidence base, that there is reporting on the impact, that we do collect the impact from the data from the investee, but also from the other beneficiaries. We do field checks, sometimes also without the companies knowing. We do speak directly to their customers or beneficiaries, however you want to call that now, in order to really get first-hand evidence. That kind of ethics, where there is always this direct link also to the impact, is very, very important for us as a sector overall, so that we can really make sure that as a sector, our investors, our donors, our funders understand that this is the proof of concept and the proof of evidence that we are pursuing, that we're very transparent about that. And I think I'll leave it at that. And obviously, I also have later on then time for questions. Would be happy to answer any questions on that.
So thank you so much, Karen, for the insights, and again for linking your activity to the principles of the Charter. And as Gianluca was mentioning, for us as EVPA, it's really important to have you on board as practitioners, really explaining how everything in practice works, because we like frameworks, we like principles, but then of course, while listening to your experiences is really what enriches us. So we already received some interesting questions. I invite you to continue to send us questions for our speakers, and I just want to summarize a bit. So we were saying that, of course, additionality is a crucial word. That's investors for impact start from the problem and they're focused on solutions. That long-term vision and approach is needed in the sector. Investors for impact should be ready to take on risks, should embed social impact risk consideration while deciding whether to invest, that money is not enough in the sector. We also need capacity building and non-financial support, that we need to take a bottom-up approach as investors for impact, always considering needs and characteristics of the social purpose organization while thinking how we can invest and support these realities. And of course, again, integrity, transparency, ethics are very much needed in the sector. And last but not least, alone we cannot do everything, but it's very important to collaborate among ourselves as investors, and of course to try to speak to the others in order to mobilize additional resources to generate greater social impact. So I can start now with some questions. We received a question from Holly, and then of course if the other speakers would like to intervene on these this topic, you can do so. Only someone from the audience was interested in understanding what is your relationship with financial returns. So they wanted to know whether all your investments for impact require also financial returns. So please, Dolly, the floor is yours to answer the question.
Yeah, of course. Hi. So in terms of the question around whether we're making an investment return or not. So we seek to, every social investment we make with philanthropic capital. So with philanthropic funders lend us money, and we use that to lend or make other forms of investment in social organizations. On an individual investment basis, we only make that investment if we are confident we are going to be repaid the capital in full, as well as our interest. But on a fund basis, we know that involves taking quite a lot of risks. So on a portfolio basis, we expect that some of our loans that we make will lose, won't repay in full. Therefore, our funders will lose a small amount of money. It's worth adding that some of the investments we make have the potential for making a positive financial return, so making a capital gain or repaying us more than the initial amount of capital we paid out. So, for example, some of the social impact bonds we've invested in, where we've taken a very high risk to support something that has potentially very high social impact and is very innovative. And there is a kind of potential really positive financial return there as well. So some of the social impact bonds investments we've made in the last 2 years have actually made a very, very substantial kind of financial return, which has been very helpful to the rest of our portfolio. So I hope that answers the question. So kind of, we're expecting overall from a portfolio level to lose a little bit of money. And the reason we say that is because we're taking quite high risks on the investments we're making.
So thank you so much, Ollie. In case Karen or Peter, you would like to say something also on your financial return expectations. Otherwise, I have other questions for you, but please let me know.
Yes, I think for us, also similar to what Holly was saying, one is our sourcing is philanthropic, which means we do not aim to provide then returns to any investors. Obviously, because we are providing loans. That is obviously limiting the upside. Let's say, so it's not in that way you're not going to make any multiples on investment, but any investment is any return is very clearly capped at the maximum, and at the interest rate that is rather modest. We also expect, because it's highly risky, we do expect to lose some of the investments, at least partially. That could happen. But our aim overall is obviously the interest to preserve the capital. So we will be able to, similar to an evergreen fund, to be able to reinvest it and recycle basically the funding that comes back from these businesses into new social business funding.
Thank you so much, Karen. We received a question for Peter, specifically on social impact. So Peter, if you can tell us a little bit more how you can quantify or measure social impact before you decide whether to invest in a social enterprise, in case you don't have enough information, enough data on impact available. So what is your procedure? What is your strategy while deciding whether to invest or not, in case of not so much in-depth impact data?
Yeah, it's a good question, because that is the challenge. We have a target on a fund level, so we need to reach an impact, a return on a social return on investment of 2, meaning that the impact of what our portfolio companies do should be at least double the amount of input. And the input is not the investment that we put in, but the input is the input that goes into the social issue. So we to be safe, we want at least every company that we invest in to reach that level of an SRI of 2. And that, well, how it is actually working out, you usually only find out when you've done the full analysis, which is usually post-closing after the investment. But we do, well, in the initial screening stage, we make an assessment. Let's say it is on the back of a cigar box, but with the experience we have by now, we've seen hundreds of proposals and yeah, maybe hundreds of SROI analysis. With that experience, and together with the entrepreneur, we try to find out what the potential impact of that company is compared to its inputs. And then during the due diligence stage, we go a step deeper, where we actually have interviews with stakeholders to see what of our impact expectations is actually substantiated, and because with the initial screening you make assumptions and expectations forecast, but with interviewing stakeholders you get the feeling whether those expectations are justified to a certain extent, and that will give us the okay or the not okay for the investment. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. We are receiving some thank you messages because you answered the question, so thank you. I don't know whether Ollie or Karen, you would also like to say something about this impact data collection or evaluation while deciding whether to invest or not, because I think it's quite crucial for investors for impact tackling this issue or this challenge. So maybe Ollie, if you would like to start, or Karen, yeah.
Yes, hi. Yeah, no, I'm happy to kind of answer that. I think I just add to, like, we recognise how important it is to have really good kind of impact data. I think one of the other things we're very conscious of, to be honest, is because we're making quite small social investments. So our largest is £400,000 sterling, our smallest is £25,000 sterling, and in quite small social organisations, where their impact data collection and evaluation actually often isn't very good. So we also recognise the importance of being, I guess, proportionate in what we're asking for. So we think it's as important to understand what data they are collecting, what information they're gathering, so that they can make an informed decision about how they can improve their activities, so how they can improve their impact. And that might take quite, I guess, basic forms in some cases for some of the smallest organisations, but we'd rather that they were having a good understanding of their impact and starting from quite a low base point and trying to improve that, than immediately assuming that actually their data must, has to be perfect. If it's not perfect, we can't possibly invest, because part of our role as a kind of an investor for impact is to really, as Peter was saying, it's really support them to kind of, to help them to improve how they are measuring and monitoring their own impact for their sake, as much as it is for kind of our own reporting.
Yeah, and maybe just adding exactly to that, Holly, what you were saying, I would also add one challenge here is it has to be proportionate to what also such a social business, for example, can provide. The stage when we fund our social businesses, very often they have generally still challenges on tracking data, reporting data, and that is not only on impact, but that could also be on financial. So what we basically the first focus is really to have one regular reporting, but limit it to the most essential, let's say, measurements, but on a relatively frequent basis, so that it kind of forces, encourages the company to really observe their own KPIs that are key for the operations. So rather than measuring impact in this first stage, it really is about more really outcome measurement and something that is very close as much as possible to their operations, so that it also really reflects back on how they conduct their business and they can relate back to it. That's also how you get a much better compliance, in fact, and something where you start relatively small. What you can then complement it also when they get larger, that you say you could do then surveys which are run possibly even by an independent party or somebody who's not directly involved or in the organization, so it doesn't constrain their resources. So I think that is a challenge, and obviously you all know that outcome is not the same as impact, but you also need to take it stepwise to make sure it is tailored to what the organization can really deliver, and that at least what they deliver then is sound and solid data, rather than no reporting at all, which could also be a result, or basically numbers that are just not sound in themselves. I think it's a quite delicate balance and something we've been discussing a lot of with other impact investors, because it's always a challenge on how to find the right balance there.
Thank you so much, Ollie and Karen, for complementing the answers. And I have a question for the three of you. We are changing a little bit subject in the sense that we are talking about social purpose organizations' perspectives. So the audience is interested in understanding if you think that social purpose organizations are aware of these principles, and if they should be aware, and how you, as Investors for Impact, you can inform them and communicate about these principles to them in order to make them understand what is really your essence and what you are trying to do while supporting them. So maybe we can start from Peter and then again Ollie and Karen.
Yeah, so I think the principles are fairly new, so probably not even all the investors are aware. I don't think social purpose organizations are aware of the discussed principles, but I think they should, yeah, because they can also hold their impact investors. Let's say responsible is maybe not the right word, but they can point them to those principles and say, and because it says what they can expect in broad terms. Not every investor is able to comply with all of the 10 principles in one go, but at least it's a direction. And I think the SPO should are entitled, should be able to have that conversation with the investor on those principles as well.
Hi, I'll go next. This is Holly. So I think I agree with Peter that I think very few social organisations will be aware of these principles, as you said. They're very new, and I guess it is important for awareness in general. I think the reason I think social organisations would find it valuable to have the awareness is more because I hope that would mean they had a greater awareness of the type of products and services which should be available to them when they're looking for repayable finance and other forms of support. So I think kind of their awareness, I hope, would grow if kind of more investors became aware of these and began to offer repayable finance and investment that was more affordable, more risk-bearing, more flexible, more collaborative. And I think that almost translation from the principles to actually the products and services that are being offered, and kind of what that means to social organisations seeking to sustain and grow their impact. I think that feels like kind of the next really important step. I think conversely, if lots and lots of investors are hugely aware of these principles, but it's not leading to a greater availability of kind of risk-bearing, impact-focused finance, and be honest, as a kind of a community of investors for impact, we've probably failed. So I think it's it's probably a challenge to all of us to make sure that more organisations are aware of this, but also that those principles really translate to better products and services.
Yeah, honestly, I can only mirror that, and I think it's a good tool, in fact, for social purpose organizations to also engage with investors and say, what are you doing along these fronts? What is your philosophy? It does help them also to, let's say, to weed out maybe also the not so much impact-oriented investors. So I think it's a tool, and it's a good opening also to engage in a conversation with impact investors, also for an FPO.
Thank you so much to our speakers today. You shared really interesting insights, and we're very happy that you were with us today to put the charter in the right perspective, and also explaining us again the essence of these principles. So I think that we can move to the next slide, and I would like to share with you the link again to the interactive charter, reminding you that as of next week you will be able to access this presentation and the recording on our website. At this link, this page, you can also find all the other material that we have produced, the link to the Charter of Investors for Impact. And also I invite the audience who is interested in it, because we received several questions related to the way in which we see venture philanthropy, impact investing, social investment. I invite you to download our latest research report, 15 Years of Impact, in which you can find our updated spectrum of the impact ecosystem, where you can really see how we are creating investors for impact, investors with impact, vis-a-vis the definition of impact investing, venture philanthropy, and so on. I think it's a good summary of all the insights that we have collected throughout the years. Then, as you can see, it would be great if you can sign the charter. Of course, if you like the principles and you think that the community should endorse them, but also apply them in their daily work. It's on an individual basis, so as you can see, there is a form that you can fill in. Last but not least, after we close this webinar, you will receive a super short survey in which we are asking you feedback about this webinar. And of course, since we are also interested in understanding what is our own impact, it would be great if you can spend 2 minutes in filling this out. And then I think that for today, we can really thank you all. Again, thank you, Olli, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Karen, for being today with us and for sharing this your perspective and your works. In case there are still questions, you can always write us an email, and we will follow up with hopefully relevant answers. So thank you to our sponsor, the European Commission, and again, thank you, Olli, Peter, and Karen, and thank you, Gianluca. We hope you enjoyed the webinar, and we hope you will sign the charter in the coming days. Any further comments, Olli, Peter, Karen? Otherwise, we can close the webinar.
Okay, I think it's a great piece of work. Honestly, I think it's a really, really important step forward, and it really helps defining what a real impact investor is. So I think it's a really, really valuable tool, I have to say. So thank you, in fact, for putting this all together and for being at the center of that work. It's to you, Alessia, and Gianluca, and EVPA in general.
Thank you.
I second that wholeheartedly. Yeah.
And also ditto for me, it's a really good opportunity as well to speak with fellow practitioners about and understand a little bit more about what they're doing to kind of really move this forward.
So thank you so much. Have a good afternoon and stay tuned.